So, ready to dive into the world of Estonian? Buckle up because, let me tell you, Estonian is not your average European language.
Not even close. See, a lot of European languages, they trace their roots back to that Indo-European family, but Estonian, it charts its own course.
Totally. It's like, that one relative that shows up at a family reunion and you're like, wait, are you sure we're related?
Exactly. Estonian is like that. It's part of the Finnic branch, which is part of the Uralic language family. So it's way more closely related to Finnish, and honestly, just a handful of other languages sprinkled around the Baltic Sea. You wouldn't believe how different it is from English or Spanish.
Really highlights how incredibly diverse languages can be.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, who would have guessed a language right there in the heart of Europe would have such distant linguistic cousins?
It speaks volumes about the crazy journeys languages take over time. And speaking of journeys, the Estonian language itself has a history that's full of twists and turns, evolutions. It's a wild ride.
No kidding. For centuries, think about it, they had two main dialects, North and South Estonian, each with its own little quirks. They didn't actually fully merge into the modern Estonian we know and love until, well, relatively recently.
It really makes you think two ways of speaking evolving side by side, and then bam, they combine into this single, unified language.
Makes you wonder what got lost in translation, and what amazing new things emerged from that merger.
Definitely. And to make things even more interesting, Estonian's history with German rule left its mark. You might not expect it, but if you dig a little deeper, you'll find this whole layer of German vocabulary woven into the language.
It's like finding these hidden etymological treasures, those little echoes of the past right there in the words themselves. Don't you think those subtle influences are what give a language its character?
Couldn't agree more. And Estonian. Oh, it's got character in spades, especially when you start exploring its literature.
Absolutely. And speaking of Estonian literature, there's no ignoring the huge impact of the 19th century on the language, especially a period they call the Estophile Enlightenment.
A pivotal time, that's for sure. This era was like a boom in Estonian national identity, and with it came this passionate push to elevate the status of the Estonian language. They wanted to see it used in education, government, and of course, in literature.
It's like the language itself became a symbol of their growing national pride.
Exactly. Before that period, written Estonian wasn't as common, but this Estophile movement, they championed Estonian, said it was just as capable of expressing the full range of human thought and emotion as any other language.
And nobody embodies that spirit better than Christian Jacob Peterson. Talk about a pioneer of Estonian literature. He was one of the first to really champion the beauty and power of the Estonian language.
Totally. His poems, especially Kuu, which means the moon, carried this powerful message about how Estonian can stand shoulder to shoulder with any other great literary language out there.
It's like he was saying, hey world, Estonian's ready for its close-up.
Exactly. He really believed in the power of his native language, and his work helped pave the way for generations of Estonian writers to come.
And speaking of paving the way, you can really see that love for language in how much Estonians adore literature. They're actually some of the most avid readers anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. They hold the record, actually, for the most books owned per household.
It's incredible.
Right.
Now.
A country with a relatively small population, but their love for literature is off the charts.
It just goes to show how deeply intertwined literature is with Estonian society.
It really does. Now, ready to dig into what makes Estonian so structurally unique?
Hit me with it. I keep hearing about this thing called an agglutinative language, and I'm not going to lie, it sounds a little intimidating. What's the deal with that?
Honestly, it's way less scary than it sounds. Agglutinative just means Estonian loves to tack on suffixes onto words, kind of like building with Legos.
Okay, that paints a much friendlier picture than what I had going on in my head. But can you give me an example? You know me, I'm all about seeing it in action.
Of course, of course. So let's say you want to say, I am walking towards a bigger house. We need, like 6 words in English, Estonian. One word, Shrimajani.
Wait, really? Just one word for all of them?
Yep. And each little chunk of that word has a specific meaning. You've got surima for bigger, maja for house, and ni, which gives you that chord's direction.
Wow, that's wild. It's like cramming an entire sentence into a single word. Efficient, but man, talk about a workout for your brain.
It definitely makes for a language that's super nuanced. And speaking of nuanced, get this, cases. You know how English nouns, we only have a couple of those, right? Subjective, objective.
Yeah, English likes to keep things nice and simple.
Well, Estonian decided to crank things up a notch. Ready for this? 14. 14 cases.
14. It's like Estonia looked at English grammar and was like, Hold my beer.
It's definitely a system. But basically, it means Estonian can express the roles of nouns in a sentence with insane precision, location, possession, direction. There's a case for pretty much everything.
I can only imagine the possibilities. It's like having this whole box of crayons to color with instead of just a black and white coloring book.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. This whole system allows for a level of detail and nuance that a lot of languages just can't touch. But hey, enough about grammar for now. Let's talk about something a little more, shall we say, ear-catching. The sounds of Estonian.
Oh, yes. Tell me about this mysterious A sound I've heard whispers about. Is it like yodeling? A growl? Do I need to warm up my vocal cords before you even try to explain it?
It's not quite that exotic, I promise, but it is a sound that's unique to Estonian and really only a few other languages. Technically speaking, it's what we call an unrounded back vowel, but picture it this way. Imagine a deeper, throatier kind of sound.
Okay, I can hear that. Like a richer, more grounded version of that sound. It's amazing how much the sounds of a language can shape how it feels, you know?
Absolutely. And this sound, just one example of how Estonian loves to challenge what we think a language should sound like.
Speaking of challenging norms, we can't forget Johannes Avik and his, well, let's call it a creative approach to language. Creating words from scratch. That's next level linguistics. What was he thinking?
It was a few things, really. He was a huge believer in linguistic purism. He wanted a distinctly Estonian vocabulary. At the time, Estonian had borrowed a ton of words from German and other neighboring languages. Avik wanted to create something richer, something that felt more uniquely Estonian.
So it was about more than just making up words. It was about shaping a national identity through language, wasn't it?
Exactly. It was about reclaiming ownership and pride in their language. And you know what? As out there as some of his creations might seem, many of them are so deeply woven into the language now that most Estonians don't even realize they were, well, made up.
That's incredible. Talk about the power of intention. But you said he was inspired by other languages.
Right. So as much as he was about creating pure Estonian words, Ivik was a polyglot, meaning he knew a ton of languages. And you can see that influence in his work, like roim, his word for crime. It's surprisingly close to the English word.
Makes you wonder if it was subconscious or a little nod to English. Are there other examples like that?
Definitely. Taunima, which means to condemn in Estonian, it's strikingly similar to the Finnish tuomita, which also means to condemn or judge. These little similarities, they really highlight how interconnected languages are, you know, how they influence each other, even across different language families.
No language is an island, right? There's always this web of connections and influences shaping how we speak.
Absolutely. And that brings us right back to Estonian. It's a language shaped by this unique blend of historical influences, geography, and even these conscious efforts by individuals like Avik, like weaving a tapestry, you know.
A linguistic melting pot that's been simmering for centuries.
Perfect analogy. And nowhere is that more evident than when you look at Estonian's journey to becoming the official language of Estonia.
A journey that's deeply intertwined with Estonia's fight for independence, am I right? I'm really interested to hear more about that chapter. It's pretty amazing when you think about it, the Estonian language navigating those turbulent political times right alongside the Estonian people. You were talking about the 19th century as this turning point. What were some of the big moments in that fight for recognition?
Well, the Estophel Enlightenment period, it wasn't just about celebrating Estonian culture. It was about pushing back against, well, centuries of linguistic dominance by the Baltic German elite. You see, these Estophile thinkers, they understood that language. It's the foundation of cultural identity. It's a powerful tool, you know. They could use it to shape their own destiny.
So it was about taking back their voice. Wow, I can only imagine the passion, the commitment that must have taken.
Oh, it was a real grassroots movement. Estonian intellectuals, writers, educators, you name it, they were working tirelessly. Promoting the use of Estonian in schools, in government, in everyday life, they knew that for Estonia to thrive as a nation, their language had to be front and center.
And all their efforts, they paid off when Estonia finally got its independence in 1918, right?
You got it. And declaring Estonian the official language, that was huge. It solidified their hard-won independence and finally gave the Estonian language the platform it deserved. Can you imagine? Their language, it had been pushed aside, marginalized for so long, and now it was a symbol of their nationhood.
It's a powerful reminder of how important language is to unity, to self-determination. But this journey wasn't over yet, was it? I mean, the Soviet occupation, that cast a long shadow over Estonia, and I can't help but think their language must have been affected.
Sadly, you're right. When the Soviets took over in 1940, they tried to suppress the Estonian language once again. Russian became the language of power, used in administration, education, everywhere, pushing Estonian back into the shadows.
After fighting so hard for their linguistic identity, only to face that kind of suppression again. It's heartbreaking. But I bet it also fueled even stronger resistance.
Oh, absolutely. Even under those conditions, Estonians found ways to keep their language alive. They spoke Estonian at home, kept their literary traditions going, even used coded language as a form of resistance.
It just shows you that bond between language and cultural identity, it runs deep. Even when faced with that kind of adversity, people found ways to hold on to that part of themselves.
Their resilience is something else. And when Estonia finally regained its independence in 1991, that victory, it wasn't just for the nation, it was for the Estonian language too. It was reinstated to its rightful place.
From being suppressed to being celebrated as the official language of a free nation, the story of Estonian is one of resilience, resurgence, a powerful connection between our people and their language.
It really makes you realize that language, it's so much more than just a way to communicate. It's a living record of history, culture, the spirit of the people who speak it.
You know, you mentioned Estonian dialects earlier, and it got me thinking. I have this picture in my head of everyone in Estonia speaking in perfect unison. But I have a feeling reality is a bit more, shall we say, colorful.
You're spot on. Estonian isn't this monolithic thing. It's got this incredible diversity of regional variations, each with its own special something. Think of it like a family tree. Standard Estonian. That's rooted in the northern dialects. Then you've got southern dialects like Voro and Seto branching out with their own unique characteristics.
Now that's fascinating. Are we talking slight variations in pronunciation? Or could someone from Tallinn find themselves completely lost in a conversation with someone from Voro?
It can be that different. They share a common ancestor, sure, but centuries of being geographically separated, different influences, it's led to some pretty significant changes. I'm talking pronunciation shifts, unique vocabulary, even grammatical quirks. It's like each region has taken the Estonian language and added its own personal flair.
It makes you want to grab a map, pick a region, and just listen to how the language changes and evolves from place to place. Talk about a linguistic adventure.
Exactly. Each dialect, it's like a window into the history of the people who speak it, their interactions with other cultures, their relationship with the land. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Estonian, haven't we? Everything from its Uralic roots and that intricate grammar to its rich literary tradition, and even, well, the sheer audacity of creating words from thin air.
It's been quite a ride. We've seen how this language, often overlooked on the world stage, has not only survived, but thrived, adapting, evolving, even in the face of some pretty huge challenges.
You know, if there's one thing I'm walking away with from this deep dive, it's that Estonian, it's more than just words and grammar rules. It's a testament to the power of language, to its ability to shape identity, preserve culture, connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Beautifully said. And for anyone listening who's even a little bit curious about languages, I urge you go explore Estonian. Let it challenge your preconceived notions, surprise you, broaden your understanding of what language can be. You might even be inspired to invent a few words of your own.
And there you have it. Another deep dive in the books. Until next time, keep those ears open, those minds curious, and never ever underestimate the power of language.